Hello, boys and girls. That's going to be my tagline from now on. I'll just always say boys and girls and piss some people off. I'm going to talk about another one of our toys from my attic. In other words, it's part of my collection. So we've done a few. We've done the Aragon amplifier. We did an Apogee. I did a Soda turntable, I think. So let's do one of my favorite speakers of all time. I first heard these speakers back when I was a budding audiophile in the, I want to say 1986, 87. I had been saving money. I was in university. I've been reading the Stereo Review magazine for the longest time, and Stereo Review and High Fidelity magazines both said the best speaker in the world that you should buy is the Bose 901. Many of you have heard this story before. If you haven't, I'm going to bore you to death again. And so finally, I saved enough money. I went to this store on Queen Street. I bought it. I brought it home, hooked it up to my electronics, and I was all excited, turned it on, and it sounded like shit. It was terrible. Bose is going to sue me because, especially now that they own Macintosh, it didn't sound good. I couldn't get it to sound right. And I'm not some crazy audiophile. It just didn't sound right. And I had the EQ. I turned it up, down. Nothing. Bass was blah. It wasn't extended. It wasn't clear. There were no high frequencies. I think there's a saying, no highs, no lows, it must be Bose. Something like that. Again, don't sue me. I'm just repeating what people say. I was very disappointed. Suffice to say, because I'd saved for so long and I didn't have any money, this really, really disappointed me. And then one day in university, in the library, I came across this magazine. It's called UHF, Ultra High Fidelity. It's a magazine that was published, I think they're still in publication, in Quebec, Quebec, Canada. And I started reading and I was shocked. For the first time, magazines actually talked about the sound of something rather than just the measurements. And I was so intrigued. I didn't realize that electronics had sonic character because I'd never gone around to listen. Anyway, so I started to get really deep into the rabbit hole and picked up my copy of the Yellow Pages. The older among you will remember what a Yellow Pages is. For those of you younger, it was like Google ads for back then. It's a big, thick book that you could basically kill somebody with. It was all yellow, so that's why it was called Yellow Pages. And businesses would advertise in the Yellow Pages to get people to go. And so for stereo stores, it was under Stereophonic. So I would look up all the stores and try to visit each one of them whenever I had time. And one day I had some time and I noticed there was a store also on Queen Street in the beaches, what we call the beach residents hate it when the rest of us call it the beaches. They call it the beach. So let me say the beach. So anyway, I took the bus all the way down there, and I went there and I saw this nondescript door that led down to the basement. So I opened the door, went down, and I saw this showroom, and on one wall was all cardboard egg crates. For those of you, again, you buy eggs, you'll know that they came in dozens and they were on this flat of, egg crates. So he had stuck all these egg crates on the wall, and right in front of that wall was this panel, these two panels that were see-through, and there was music very quietly playing through it. And I went all the way up to the speaker and I put my ears against it. I couldn't understand. How's this a speaker? I've never seen anything like this before. So then the gentleman came out, asked me if I could help. I said, I'm looking for a better system. I told him my sad story. He laughed at me and then he says, well, obviously, those are not very good speakers. I said, what are these? So he started telling me. So the speakers I'm going to talk about are called the Martin Logan CLSs, curvilinear sound source or something other, CLS. I can't remember what it stands for. And they're basically electrostatic speakers. So what an electrostatic speaker is a panel. You've got a piece of plastic, typically mylar. It's sandwiched between two metal stators, metal grills or frames, and there's electrical charge that's applied to the stators. And depending on the polarity, it either makes the speaker move back or forward, the diaphragm. And so that's how you get sound. I'm simplifying it very much. If you've never seen a Martin Logan speaker, you got to go online or go to a store and check them out. The main panel is literally transparent. You have this metal stators, and there are holes in the stator so you can see through the speaker. I was blown away. Even at very low levels, you could tell that there was something very magical about the sound. And then he started to play me some music. So let me tell you about this. He had a turntable, which later on I found out was a VPI HW19. He had, if I remember correctly, the audible, no, it was the, God, my mind. No, it wasn't the Audible Illusions, that came later. And then he had a pair of Quicksilver monoblock tube amplifiers. And he put on this record, and it's called the Weavers Reunion in Carnegie Hall, 1963 recording. And although I didn't know the music, I knew the Weavers. They're a folk group, and he played me this piece of music called Rambling Boy. And I swear to you, Pete Seeger was in the room in front of me. I mean, it was spooky. And you could hear the audience all the way in the back. So the speakers are 5 feet from the wall, and suddenly you could hear the audience all the way in the back, and you could hear them shuffling, you could hear a bit of coughing, and then towards the latter part of the song, the audience chimes in and they sing along with Pete Seeger. It was the most incredible experience in my audio life. Even to this day, there are some moments, many of you will be able to relate. There are some moments in your audio experience where you will never forget, and that's one of those experiences. I was so blown away. And then he played me a couple other pieces, and they were just as beautiful. And I said to myself, one day I will buy them. So many years later, I did in fact buy one. Sold it eventually for some stupid reason. Became a dealer of Martin Logan, sold a ton of the Martin Logans, but they weren't the same because those were hybrids. In other words, they had woofers at the bottom, so they're called the Arias, the sequels, and although they were quite nice, that magic was never the same as the Martin Logan CLSs. The CLS is a pure, full-range electrostatics. There's no woofers, there's just nothing, just incredible. Anyway, many years later, eventually I found another pair. They had been discontinued by then. I found a pair of CLS 2Zs. There are about 3 or 4 different versions. The original CLS, CLS 2, CL2B or C, and then 2Z. Anyway, I found a pair, and I've kept them ever since. Now, Mike's been with us for how long now, Mike?
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years. And I told him, we're going to do this video. He says, we have a pair? He didn't even know because I had put them all the way in the back. I've never pulled them out in all that time because they're so rare. And the truth is, they're so interesting sounding that if you like them, you'll immediately want to buy them. And it's very hard to find a pair, especially one that's working properly, that I just don't want to pull them out and tempt anybody. So I told Mike when he gets a chance, pull them out and listen to them. That's the speaker. Now, what are some of the unique features about the speaker? Well, from a sonic standpoint, they are literally among the most transparent speakers I've ever heard. You will hear this word transparency thrown and bandied about all the time, and there are a lot of speakers that are, but very, very, very few are as transparent as these speakers. And what I mean by that is when you hear them, there's nothing between you and the performance. If it's a good recording, it'll blow you away. You will hear things you've never heard before. Like literally, it doesn't matter how often you hear the recording, you will hear things for the first time. It really is remarkable. And effortlessly, you will hear details about the performer, the way that they articulate, the way they phrase. It will just throw you into a whole different, anyway, just hard to explain. Soundstage is wide, very deep, and very nice layering, and the soundstage has a natural image height. The leading edge of the musical notes is just scary. You listen to a guitar pluck, you listen to a rim shot, a cymbal, it's just so shockingly natural and fast, lightning fast transients. I'll talk about weaknesses later. Now, there are other electrostatic speakers. Quad is one of the more famous ones. Back in the 50s, Quad came out with the original ESL, and then later on they came out with the 63, and then there are variations of the 63. And I've owned many of them, including the original ESL. In fact, I think in the office we have about 3 or 4 pairs of those. How do they compare? Well, the 63 and the variations don't have the same kind of transparency. They sound darker. They do have a little bit more bass, and they're probably tonally more natural, more maybe neutral. But that see-through sound is not quite there. That same kind of lightning speed isn't quite there. The images on the quads are more pinpoint and perhaps more accurate as a result, but I don't find it to be as believable as the soundstage image I hear from the Martin Logan. So that's the quads. Apogee duettas. Again, back around that time, there was a magazine, I think it was Stereophile, could have been another one, where they compared all three. And so the duettas, which I also have a pair, are a darker sound. The bass is heavier, richer, more powerful, goes lower. The mid-range is clear but not, again, the kind of see-through characteristic that the Martin Logans have. And the highs, although airy, are rolled off in comparison with the Martin Logans. The Martin Logans sound very clear and bright as day. It just, anyway. So those are some of the comparisons between similar kinds of panel speakers. All right, so let's talk about pros and cons. In terms of pros for the Martin Logans, you will literally hear everything. That's a good thing. If it's a great recording, it'll blow you away. On wonderful reference recordings that you like, you will enjoy them literally for the first time. You will hear the way the musicians play, the articulation, the accentuation, the way they interpret everything. Just completely different than anything you've ever heard. You will hear clothes rubbing against the guitar body. That's how transparent it is. The piano pedals, as he steps on the piano or she steps on the piano, you'll hear the all of that. On some of the EMI Decca recordings of classical recordings, you will hear the subway train rumbling underneath Kingsway, the Kingsway Hall. That's how transparent it is, right? The speakers are ideal for smaller ensembles, vocals, jazz trios, quartets, small classical pieces, not so much for large-scale music. So I guess let's go with the cons. Number one, no deep, powerful bass. The bass is there, but it's just not very deep, not very convincing, deep bass I'm talking about, and doesn't have the kind of power that a good floor-standing speaker would have. At high levels, it can sound harsh. There are ways to ameliorate, which I'll talk about in a moment. So you need to place the speakers 4 to 5 feet from the wall behind the speakers to give it its room to breathe. It needs that. It's not the best thing if you enjoy primarily rock, hard rock, big classical pieces. There are ways, again, to ameliorate some of that. Big, loud volumes of EDM, anything at very high levels, it's not really the ideal speaker for that. If you like to walk around a lot while you listen to music, it's not ideal for that. And it's not for the reasons that some people think. First of all, although the speakers are somewhat directional, in other words, they sound best when you sit down, they don't sound bad when you are about 8-10 feet away from the speakers. It's just the way panels are. Panels don't produce their sound vertically very well and don't produce very much sound at all towards the side. So if you're sitting and your ears are within the panel, they sound great. But the moment you stand up and you are taller than the panel, a lot of the high frequencies will be lost. However, if you are 8-10 feet away, you will still get a lot of the high, so you're okay there. It's just that when you are standing up, imaging and so on disappear. Now, lots of speakers, when you sit down, imaging's pretty good. When you stand up, imaging's pretty good. Here's the difference. Pretty good is not the same as spectacular. And that's the difference. When you sit down, the sound is spectacular. And when you stand up and you walk around, it's no longer spectacular. Let's call it good or pretty good. That calibrated difference is what makes people think, oh, it's no good. It's not. It's just that in comparison to what you know to be amazing, pretty good is not quite the same. Does that make sense? All right, so, one more thing. Panel speakers, especially electrostatic speakers, over time the panels will degrade. Martin Logan's generally 10 to 15 years from what I'm told. Mine apparently still work very, very well, so I'll give you some tips about that. But basically, if you're going to buy a pair, you need to watch out for that. As far as I know, Martin Logan still supports them. You can still buy the panels. The panels are, I think, about $1,000 or $1,500 each, so you can still do it. And thank God, because again, for that money, you just can't find anything as good, as far as I'm concerned. Now, so here are some tips. If you want the bass, you can get pretty good blend between a good subwoofer and the speakers. One trick is to use speakers like the Sonus Faber Gravis subwoofers, the REL subwoofers, and Martin Logan's own Balance Force subwoofers. They have to be fast, articulate, and very controlled. In the case of the REL and the Sonus Faber subwoofers, the best connection is using the high level. In other words, they look like speaker cables. They connect to the back of your amplifier, and it gets its feed, the signal feed from the amplifier, instead of a low pass or a low level connection like an RCA connection. That will not give you as good a sound as the using the high level connections. So look for Sonus Faber speakers, subwoofers, or REL subwoofers to give you the best results, or as I say, Martin Logan's own Balance Force subwoofers. Try to use electronics that sound a bit on the warmer side. So for example, with tubes, I would go with tube amps like any of the audio researchers, the Macintosh, Conrad Johnson's, BATs, even older vintage tube amplifiers, they'll actually work quite well. Just make sure they have enough power. Generally, I like at least 50 watts. Second tip, keep the panels vertical. Now, the original panels, on the back of the panels, you will see at the bottom there's a metal enclosure. That's where the electronics are, and they make the speaker tilt back a little bit. I actually like the sound of the speaker better when they're vertical or even tilted a little bit forward. You get a taller sense of image. It sounds more transparent to my ears, so I like that better. My speakers have custom stands, so they lift the speakers up even a bit taller. So you can do that. Try that. For longer reliability and use, disconnect the power when you're not using. As I said, these speakers, they're electrostatic, so they need a charge from the wall. So if you are going to buy these speakers, make sure you have wall outlets somewhere. So plug them in, and you can get sound almost immediately, but they sound better after about 3-4 hours, and they sound really good about a day or so later. If you're not going to use the speakers regularly, unplug them from the wall. This way the speakers don't have a charge and they don't attract dust. Dust helps to deteriorate the panels, and that's another thing. If you use your speakers regularly, then vacuum the panels every 9 months, a year, or even more. If your room is very dusty, you can get somebody to make you socks to go over the panels so it keeps the dust away. So these are some of the tips. All right, conclusion. To say that I love these speakers is an understatement. There are very, very few things in audio, and especially in my collection, where I will literally never sell until the day comes where I know I'm going to pass away and I don't want my family to deal with the headaches, and then I'll either give them away or sell them. This is one of them. These speakers will stay with me for as long as I can keep them. They do certain things so well, literally at state-of-the-art well, and even beyond, that I can't think of equivalents regardless of price. That's how good they are. They're not perfect, but they specialize in those areas so well that it's just absolutely joyous to enjoy. An analogy of that performance would be like, we're so used to cars today with all the safeties and how they're built that a good mid-size car is, 4,000 pounds. And then, of course, electric cars are even heavier than that. And so even if you put a big engine into the car, that nimbleness, if you've ever driven a vintage car from the 50s and 60s, not American muscle cars, but European cars, let's say, you'll be shocked at how those cars are so nimble. Any of the earlier Alfa Romeos, the Fiats, Mini Cooper, I was so in love with the second generation Mini Cooper that I ended up buying original version of Mini Cooper. I had it tweaked up a little bit, had better tires, upgraded suspension. That little tiny car is the exact personification of what I mean about specializing in certain areas. Light, responsive, handles like you wouldn't believe, and that's what these speakers can do. Those of you who know what I'm talking about, please comment. I'd love to read your comments. For those of you who don't know, do yourself a favor. Go listen to even a current generation Martin Logan, even if they're hybrids. They'll give you a sense of what I'm talking about. But if you ever get a chance to hear the original Martin Logan CLS, whatever the version is, that's what I'm talking about. And by the way, the reintroduction of what they call the CLZ, which was for many years Martin Logan's top of the line. It was also a full range electrostatic panel. Didn't have this magic. I know because I bought 2 pairs. Very, very good. Better than not having it. But the CLS is the one that's special. All right, thank you for watching. Love your comments. Put them below, and I'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.